Hello Tech Math Nerds. In this video we're going to take a look at the Desmos Graphing Calculator. Now many of you have maybe used this. I'm going to show you possibly some additional features that you didn't know about, though I'm not going to go super in depth, so if you see something that you're like, oh, he didn't explain that very much, you can always look on YouTube and probably find videos for specific things that I'm not really going to cover if you're interested in doing that. Now, Desmos is something that you can use as a teacher to share things with your students, and it's also a thing that your students can use to use a graphing calculator and then also theoretically share those things with you as well. So I'm going to get started by clicking that Start Graphing button. And then the other thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to sign in. Now, you can create an account with Google, so you don't need to do anything else other than if you go to create account, you just tell it to create an account with your Google account, and then you will be good to go. So it's a nice, simple thing to do. Now, once I'm in there, the first thing I'm going to do is, if you want to create multiple graphs, you can save all of them. So if you're doing something that you want to demonstrate to students, you can save that, and you can do it year after year in the same way, which is kind of cool. So I'm going to just title this Example for Tech Nerd Camp. And I spelled tech wrong, so we will fix that and hit save. And there I go. Now, I can also open old graphs. There's a button right here to open old graphs, and we'll go in there in just a little bit. But first I want to do a couple things actually in this graph. Now, you can add different lines or whatever you want to graph in here by clicking on in this location right here. So let's say I want to do y equals 3x minus 4. Okay, just as an example. Now, I can go and continue adding new expressions by just hitting the enter button, and then it continues to go down like that. I can also add things like points, and there's two ways to add points. The first way is just to put in a point, and then it adds a point. But there are other things that you can do within the system. So, for example, there's this little plus sign right here where it says Add Item, and I can click on that, and it gives me a couple of different choices to add. An expression is just a normal expression, which is basically a function that you can put in, or you can put in a point. A note is where you can write something about the graph. So if you want to have a note that talks about what the graph is, you can do that. A table is the next thing that I want to show you. And if I put in a table, what I can do is basically create a table of points. So let's do this. For x's, I'll do 1, 2, and what's nice about it is eventually it'll figure out if I'm doing a pattern for my x's, and it will continue to add points in the same order. So if I count by 1s or by 2s, it'll recognize that and follow that pattern if I want it to. And then I'll sit there and I'll make a couple of points. So I've made some points here, and all of those points showed up. And you'll notice that it's a different color. Each thing that we have on here has a different color that goes along with it, and so you can see what color it is. The other thing that happens is when you actually click on something, it kind of makes that a little bit more bold than the other things that are on the screen. So you'll notice if I click on this point right here, it gets a little bit bigger. If I click on this line, the line gets a little bit more bold. There's also folders. You can actually create folders. So if you're doing a project where students are graphing several lines to make a design or something like that, you can have them put their designs into folders. So they could put all of their horizontal lines in one folder and their vertical lines in another folder, and different things like that. I'm not going to get into folders, so if you want to look at that, that's one of the things that you could do on YouTube. Another thing that they have is images. You can actually put an image on your graph, and this image isn't very exciting, but you'll notice that when I put an image in, you can actually see behind the image. So if you had like a map or something, you could put a map on here, and then you could see the grid lines through the map, which is kind of cool. You also have the ability to move the map around. I can change where the center of the map is, or the center of the image. I can change the size of the image so that it's a different size than what's currently showing up. In any case, I'm going to get rid of that because I don't actually want it. The next thing that I want to show, and I'm going to get rid of all of these things to show this, is that if you want to show students ways that they can manipulate a graph, let's say you want to do linear equations, y equals ax plus b, let's say, and instead of putting in numbers, I want to show them how they can manipulate a and b and what it'll look like when they do that. What Desmos does is it allows you to create something called sliders. So if you put in variables instead of numbers, it'll give you the option to add a slider, and I will add all of the sliders. So I get a slider for A and for B, and then what happens is I can shift that slider so it can look at what happens when I change the value for A in this equation. I can also play it so that it goes through the process, and notice right now it's going pretty quickly. So if I wanted to, I could slow down by using these arrows right here, how quickly that moves, and then at any time I can pause this. I can do the same thing with B, and I can move it and it'll see how things adjust when I change my B value. And again, I can slow this down, or if I want it to go really fast, I could speed it up and then it would go back and forth like crazy and make me dizzy. So sliders are a really cool thing that you can use if you want to demonstrate things like that. Next thing that I want to show you is that you can open graphs over here. So if you've saved other graphs, you can open them over here, but also the reason I want to show you this is because there are a lot of example graphs that they already have created for you. For example, parabolas in standard form. You can look at that and open the graph, and it has a graph already made that's a standard form parabola that already has sliders and is already set and ready to go, which is really kind of cool. You can also take a look at inequalities. You can look at some trigonometry stuff, conic sections, polar rows, and there's lots of different things in here that you can use for examples. Which is kind of a nice feature that they have these already set and ready to go for you. Another thing to notice is that you do have the ability to do inequalities. Now you can do less than or equal to. You can also do, or you can do less than or greater than. You can also do less than or equal to or greater than or equal to. And the easiest way to do that is to utilize the keypad, which is down at the bottom. There's a little keypad button, and on the keypad they do have less than or equal to, greater than or equal to. There's also a square root function, an absolute value function, squared functions. So there are some additional capabilities down here on the keyboard that it's not easy to do on your own. Okay, I'm going to go back to my graph, which I believe I deleted everything from. I want to show a couple more things. Fractions are pretty easy. You just put in 1 and then divide it by 3. To get out of a fraction, you can hit the over arrow and it'll just move you out of the fraction, 1/3 x. For example, I can do this. Another thing that you can do is you can set up a domain. So I could say that x is less than 3. And then what it'll do is it'll create a domain of x is less than 3. So I can have the graph, but it won't be through the entire graph. It'll just be through that part, up to x is less than 3. So I can do that as well. So I can have domain restrictions that I can put on graphs. One other thing that I want to make sure that I point out is if I want to do squareds, I can just do x and then do the caret and then do squared. And then the same way that you get out of a fraction, for example, you can use that to get out of your squared. So if I kept writing, it would stay in the exponent. But if I want to get out of the exponent, I just hit the over arrow to the right, and now it's out of the exponent. So, in any case, those are a couple of things that I can do. The last things that I want to show you are over here on the right side. There is a graph settings button, so you can take a look at that. You can add some different things like grids if you want or don't want grids. You can choose what type of graph that you have. So if you want a polar graph, you could take a look at that. Do you want to number the axes? Do you want to have minor grid lines? Do you want arrows on your graphs? You can adjust the x-axis and the y-axis, and then if you're doing trigonometry, you can do radians or degrees. Another thing you can do is to zoom in and zoom out to quickly change the size of your graph. And then there's the default zoom. So if you ever graph out a super far distance, you can always default and it'll go right back. The last thing I want to show is that there's a share graph function. If you click on this, what it'll do is it'll give you a link to this graph that you can then share with somebody else. So you can have your students make a graph and then they could share the link with you on Google Classroom. As a teacher, if you wanted to take this and you wanted to share a graph with your students, you could do that through Google Classroom as well. You could also embed a graph on your website, for example. You could email the graph to the students, or you can basically take an image. You can take a picture of the graph and share it as a picture. So there's lots of different ways that you can share your graph so that other people can see what it looks like. And then they can manipulate it as well and take a look at that. So those are just a couple of things that the Desmos Graphing Calculator can do for you and for your students. So I hope that helps and gives you some ideas for this upcoming year.